Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Please drop a like or comment if you want to help the channel. Now let's get into the true scary stories. The Whispering Wall. It started with the barking. At first, I thought nothing of it. Dogs bark at anything, squirrels, shadows, or the wind. But lately, Juno, my golden retriever, has been barking at the same spot on the wall every single night. At first, it was just an occasional growl or a soft bark. But 2 weeks ago, he became relentless. His barks echoed through the quiet house, low and menacing, each one sharper than the last. The wall? Completely unremarkable. Blank, white, and tucked in the corner of the living room. But Juno seemed obsessed. "Juno, knock it off!" I'd yell, hoping it was just some pest behind the drywall. But no matter what I did, Juno wouldn't budge. His wide, anxious eyes stared at the spot, hackles raised. He looked terrified, and it was starting to worry me. Even more troubling, every time I tried to pull him away from that spot, he would let out a low, guttural growl, almost as if he were warning me of something. Of what, though, I had no clue. One night, after another long day of work, I returned home to find Juno already in his usual position by the wall, snarling at the space as if it were alive. The air felt different in the house, heavier, thick with an unseen presence. I ran my fingers along the surface, knocking on it. "What is it, boy? Is something there?" Of course, there was no response. Yet, the hairs on my neck prickled as if something or someone was watching me. That's when I first heard it, a faint, almost inaudible whisper. I froze, breath catching in my throat. The sound was so soft I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but then it came again, closer this time, clearer. "Good boy." It was low, raspy, and far too human. My skin crawled, and I instinctively took a step back. Juno didn't flinch. He was still fixated on that spot, his ears pinned back. I tried to rationalize it. The house was old, maybe it was a draft, a creak of the wood. But something deep inside me knew better. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper. "Good boy." Over and over, like a sinister lullaby, mocking me. Juno stayed by the wall, watching, waiting. His calmness unnerved me more than the barking ever had. What was he seeing that I couldn't? I told myself I was overreacting, but the unease wouldn't leave. The next morning, I called in sick. I needed answers. I couldn't live in a house that felt haunted. That day, I inspected every inch of the wall. I tapped, I pulled at the baseboards, even unscrewed an outlet nearby, but I found nothing. No holes, no rats, no evidence of anything. By the time evening rolled around, I had convinced myself it was nothing more than a trick of the mind. Exhaustion, maybe. But then Juno began barking again, this time more frantic, more desperate. His body shook with fear. I turned off the TV and listened closely. The whisper returned. "Good boy." This time, it was louder, as if it were speaking directly to me. My blood ran cold. I staggered back, heart hammering against my ribs. There was someone, or something, inside my walls. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. I stared at the wall, my breath shallow, trying to make sense of it. It was just a wall. 4 layers of drywall, wood, and concrete. There couldn't be anyone inside. Right? Yet the voice, as real as the ground beneath my feet, haunted me. I couldn't bring myself to touch the wall anymore. My hands felt numb, trembling in sync with the strange energy pulsing from that corner. Juno, too, was unnervingly still now, no longer barking. He just sat there, watching it. His body rigid as if waiting for the next move. That night, I grabbed a hammer and a flashlight, determined to find the source of the whispering. It wasn't normal. It couldn't be. I had to stop it. With every swing of the hammer against the drywall, dust clouded the air, filling my lungs and eyes, but I didn't care. I tore into the wall, deeper and deeper, the sound of cracking plaster echoing through the house. Behind the drywall, I found something that made my stomach turn, a small, crudely etched symbol. It wasn't anything I recognized, but it seemed ancient, carved right into the wood beams. My heart sank as I ran my fingers over it, tracing the jagged lines. There was a darkness about it, something evil. But worse than the symbol was the unmistakable sound I heard next, a faint scratching, coming from within the wall, just behind the spot I had uncovered. "Juno, do you hear that?" I whispered, but the dog was still glued to the spot, his eyes wide and glossy, no longer barking but trembling uncontrollably. The scratching grew louder, faster. Someone was inside. My instincts screamed to leave, to get out of the house, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, waiting for what, exactly? For whatever was inside to break free. For it to speak to me again? The silence hung heavy in the air, and then it came, the voice, clearer than before. "Good boy," it rasped, but this time it followed with something else. "Come closer." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The beam flickered, casting wild shadows around the room. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. My heart pounded, my pulse deafening in my ears. Was I losing my mind? I backed away slowly, but I couldn't take my eyes off the hole in the wall. Something was moving in there, something alive. Suddenly, Juno let out a whimper and darted toward me, his body trembling as he pressed against my leg. The poor thing was terrified. I swallowed hard, kneeling down to comfort him. "It's okay, buddy, we'll get out of here." But just as I reached for the leash, the scratching stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl coming from within the wall itself. That's when I saw it. A shadowy form shifted behind the hole, barely visible, but its shape was unmistakable, long, clawed fingers reaching through the crack in the drywall. They curled and twitched, as if tasting the air, searching for something, me. "Good boy," the voice hissed again, more menacing than before. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a command. I didn't wait. Grabbing Juno by the collar, I bolted for the door, heart slamming against my chest. We tore through the hallway, Juno dragging me toward the exit. The house felt alive behind us, breathing, groaning, as if the walls themselves were shifting, closing in. The air was thick, suffocating, and every step felt heavier than the last. Just as I reached the front door, I heard it again, closer, right behind me. "Good boy. Come back." I slammed the door behind me, my chest heaving as I gulped in the cool night air. Juno whimpered, pacing nervously at my feet. The house loomed behind us, dark and still, but I could feel it, whatever had been in that wall was watching me. Waiting. I glanced down at Juno. His eyes were wide, his body trembling violently. He wasn't barking anymore, though. No, something had scared him into a quiet, primal fear. I wasn't much better. My mind was racing. Had I really seen that? Those fingers? That voice? I felt like I was going insane. But Juno had heard it too, hadn't he? We needed to leave. Now. I made it halfway down the driveway before I froze, feeling that same oppressive energy creeping up my spine, like cold hands gripping my shoulders. Something was wrong. I turned, slowly, to face the house, dreading what I might see. At first, it seemed quiet. The front windows were dark, lifeless. But then, just as I was about to look away, I saw it, a pair of eyes, glowing faintly in the window near the spot where I had torn open the wall. They were staring right at me. I felt my legs turn to lead. I couldn't breathe. The eyes were wrong, too big, too hungry. They blinked slowly, deliberately, as if mocking me, daring me to come closer. And then they disappeared, swallowed by the blackness inside the house. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over Juno, my heart racing. My hands fumbled with my phone as I dialed the only person I could think of, Megan, my best friend since childhood and, more importantly, a paranormal investigator. "Megan, I need you to come over. Now." My voice trembled as I spoke, barely able to keep it together. "Something's wrong with my house. I don't know how to explain it, but there's something inside the walls. There was a long pause on the other end. What did you just say? I could hear the urgency in her voice, but it didn't ease the dread building in my chest. Juno's been barking at this spot on the wall for weeks, and tonight, I heard something. I saw something. I swear, Megan, it's real. There's something in there. I'm on my way, she said, hanging up before I could say anything else. As I waited, standing in the cold with Juno huddled at my feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The night was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no distant hum of cars. Just silence. I kept my eyes on the house, the same house that had once felt like a safe haven but now felt like a trap. The longer I stared, the more I noticed small, unsettling details. The shadows near the windows seemed darker, thicker. The house itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting as if alive. When Megan finally arrived, she didn't even bother with pleasantries. She took one look at me, then at the house, and nodded. "Show me." We stepped inside, and immediately, the air felt different again, dense, oppressive. Megan moved quickly, her expression unreadable as she scanned the room. "Where's the spot?" she asked. I led her to the living room, where the hole in the wall was now eerily quiet. But the symbol was still there, carved into the wood. Megan's face paled when she saw it. This is bad." "What do you mean, bad?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She knelt down, inspecting the symbol closer. "It's a binding mark. Something was trapped here. Something old. You didn't disturb it, did you?" I felt the blood drain from my face. I tore open the wall. Megan's eyes widened. "Oh no, you let it out." Before I could respond, the voice came again, echoing through the house. "Good boy." Juno growled low in his throat, his body stiff as the temperature in the room plummeted. Something was moving behind the walls again, faster this time, more frantic. The scratching, the whispering, it all returned with a vengeance. And then, with a sickening crack, the wall split open. The wall tore open like paper, revealing a yawning black void where plaster and beams should have been. The edges pulsed with an unnatural darkness, and the air that flowed from it was thick, damp, and cold. I stumbled back, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Megan grabbed my arm, pulling me away as the shadows writhed, twisting into grotesque shapes. "Stay back," she warned, her voice barely holding its composure. "We've got to get out of here, now." But before we could move, the voice returned, louder, no longer a whisper but a growl that reverberated through the room. "Good boy." Juno whimpered, frozen in place, his eyes locked on the darkness spilling from the wall. From within, something began to emerge, its form distorted, shifting like smoke but solid enough to cast a shadow. It was tall, its limbs too long, its fingers clawed and dragging across the floor as it pulled itself into our world. The face. God, the face. Hollow eyes, like pits of endless night, stared at us, and its mouth stretched impossibly wide in a grotesque grin. Megan muttered something under her breath, some kind of prayer or incantation, but I barely heard her over the deafening silence that filled the room. The creature's head jerked toward us, its neck cracking unnaturally. "Good boy," it said again, but now it was clear the voice wasn't meant for Juno. It was meant for me. What does it want?" I stammered, backing away. Megan was pale, her eyes darting between me and the creature. "It's been waiting. The mark you found, it was a seal. Someone trapped it here long ago, and by breaking that wall, you set it free. It's connected to you now." I shook my head, my mind reeling. "Connected? How?" Megan didn't have a chance to answer. The thing lunged, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. Its limbs stretched out, and before I could react, it was on top of me, its breath cold and rancid as it hissed into my ear. "Good boy." I screamed, feeling the icy touch of its claws scrape against my skin. Juno barked wildly, but his barks were swallowed by the oppressive darkness. I tried to fight it off, but my body wouldn't respond. The creature was inside my head now, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. And then, just as I thought I would lose myself completely, I heard Megan's voice cutting through the haze. She was chanting, her words sharp and ancient. The air around us crackled with energy, and the creature shrieked, recoiling as if burned. It lashed out, its clawed hand sweeping toward her, but Megan stood firm, her voice growing louder, more forceful. The thing howled, its form flickering and distorting as it was pushed back toward the wall, toward the darkness from which it had come. But even as it was driven away, I could feel it, still inside me, a piece of it clinging to my mind. It wasn't gone. Not really. The last thing it said before disappearing into the void was a promise, not to Juno but to me. "Good boy. I'll be waiting." The wall sealed itself with a groaning sound, and the house fell silent. Juno lay at my feet, exhausted but alive. Megan, pale and shaking, wiped sweat from her brow. "It's gone, for now." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That the creature, whatever it was, had left a mark on me. A connection that wouldn't be so easily broken. "Is it still in the walls?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Megan looked at me, her face grim. "No. It's not in the walls anymore. Now, it's in you." Hey. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Lullaby. The lullaby began to play softly from the old baby monitor, an ethereal hum weaving through the air. I stopped what I was doing, frozen in place, heart thudding against my chest. The gentle melody was unmistakable, the same haunting tune I'd heard for the past few nights. The problem was simple: I didn't have a baby. I never did. And tonight, like all the nights before, the power was out. I slowly moved through the dim, flickering light of the candles I had lit hours ago, my hands trembling as I reached for the baby monitor. Static buzzed through its tiny speaker, punctuated by that distant, eerie lullaby, as if someone, or something, was singing from the other side. Every part of me screamed to turn it off, but I couldn't. It was as though my hands had a will of their own, refusing to break the fragile connection between me and the unseen. "Who's there?" I whispered hoarsely into the device, feeling utterly ridiculous yet terrified. The melody continued, lilting softly, its words distant and unintelligible. I backed away, pressing my back to the cold wall of the nursery. My eyes flicked to the crib in the corner, its bars cast in long shadows by the candlelight. It had been left there by the previous owner, a reminder of their lost child. I had never touched it. I had never needed to. But now it felt like it was watching me, waiting. A sudden cold draft swept through the room, sending shivers down my spine. I glanced toward the window, closed, locked, like always. Yet the air was thick with an unnatural chill, making my breath mist in the stillness. I couldn't shake the growing sensation that something was wrong. The melody swelled louder, its sickening sweetness filling my ears, drowning out the silence. My legs carried me back toward the hallway, each step hesitant, dragging as if something unseen were pulling me backward. Just as I reached the doorway, I heard a faint giggle. A child's giggle, soft, playful, but distorted, like it was coming from underwater. My stomach knotted with fear. The monitor hissed again, the lullaby fading to static. And then, just as suddenly, the laughter stopped. Silence. I stood there, trembling, waiting for the next sound. My mind raced. I wanted to believe this was some horrible trick of the imagination, maybe my own nerves getting the best of me. But deep down, I knew better. The nights had been getting worse, and the strange occurrences more frequent. Doors that had been locked would creak open. Footsteps would echo down the hall when no one was home. And that damn lullaby, it always started at the same time, after sunset, when the house was plunged into darkness. Suddenly, the sound of a creak came from behind me. The door to the nursery, which I had left ajar, was now wide open. And something, or someone, was standing in the shadows of the doorway. I blinked, trying to focus on the shape in the doorway, but the candlelight flickered too wildly. My mind grasped for a reason, maybe a trick of the shadows, maybe nothing at all, but my heart knew better. There was someone standing there, motionless, just outside the nursery door. I forced myself to step forward, my feet barely obeying the command. My breath caught in my throat as I reached for the door, my hand trembling. The figure melted into the darkness as I approached, but I could feel it watching, waiting. The air grew thicker, heavier, almost suffocating. It smelled damp, like old earth after a storm, mixed with something faintly metallic. My fingers brushed the wood of the door, and just as I pushed it open, a voice whispered my name. I froze. It wasn't a child's voice this time. It was deeper, raspier, like it had been dragged through decades of dust and decay. Sarah. It rasped, drawing out each syllable like a slow breath. My heart leaped into my throat, and I spun around. No one. The hallway behind me was empty, save for the flickering shadows cast by the candles. Who's there? My voice was barely above a whisper, shaking as badly as my hands. I took a step back into the nursery, the door creaking loudly behind me. The lullaby had stopped, leaving a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. I glanced at the baby monitor. It was dead, the light extinguished, just like the rest of the house. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the room, the crib that had always been empty wasn't anymore. There was a small bundle there now, wrapped in tattered blankets, almost too small to be real. My breath caught in my chest as the blankets shifted slightly. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body betrayed me. I took a step closer, then another, drawn in by some primal curiosity. A part of me needed to see what was beneath those blankets. Needed to know if it was alive. As I reached the crib, the room grew colder still, my skin prickling with goosebumps. Slowly, with trembling fingers, I reached down and tugged at the corner of the blanket. It came away easily, revealing a doll, an old, cracked porcelain doll with wide, vacant eyes and a mouth twisted into an eerie, frozen smile. I exhaled sharply, a wave of shaky relief washing over me. It was just a doll, nothing more. My heart began to slow, the tension in my body easing. But then, without warning, the doll's eyes blinked. I stumbled back, knocking into the crib as the room seemed to tilt and twist around me. The doll's mouth parted ever so slightly, just enough to release a soft, mechanical giggle, the same giggle I had heard through the monitor. My blood turned to ice. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. My heart pounded as I fumbled for the knob, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. From behind me came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, small and shuffling. I spun around, pressing my back against the door. The doll was still lying in the crib, eyes closed now, but the blankets were shifting again. Something was moving beneath them. Something larger. The blankets slid off, revealing a hand, small, pale, and unnaturally thin, reaching up from underneath. My chest tightened as I watched in horror, unable to look away as the hand gripped the edge of the crib and slowly pulled itself up. A child, no, a thing, crawled out from beneath the blankets, its body twisted, broken in unnatural ways. Its eyes were black, bottomless voids, and its smile stretched too wide across its face. It looked at me, its head tilting unnaturally to one side, and whispered in that same rasping voice, "Sarah, come play with me." The creature crawled toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on fraying strings. My back pressed harder against the nursery door, my hands fumbling for the knob, desperate to escape. But it wouldn't budge. The thing, whatever it was, dragged its twisted limbs across the floor, its black eyes locked on me, its mouth stretching wider as it whispered again, "Sarah, don't leave me." I screamed, finally breaking the silence that had gripped the room like a vice, and threw my body against the door. With a loud snap, the knob finally gave way, and I stumbled backward into the hall. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart racing, but I didn't stop. I sprinted down the hallway, not daring to look back, the heavy thuds of my footsteps echoing around me. Somewhere in the distance, the lullaby began again, soft and slow, each note like a thread pulling me back. I burst into the living room, slamming the door behind me, and collapsed onto the couch, my chest heaving. My mind was spinning, trying to grasp what I had just seen. That thing, it couldn't have been real. None of this could be real. But the lingering sound of that soft, sickly sweet lullaby was still there, rising and falling like a gentle breath. It felt like the house itself was humming the tune, its walls vibrating with the song. My phone was on the coffee table, and with trembling hands, I grabbed it, frantically scrolling through my contacts. I needed help, someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. But just as I was about to dial, the screen flickered, the battery icon flashing red. Dead. Of course, it was dead. A soft creak came from the hallway behind me, and I froze. I didn't want to look. I couldn't. But some invisible force pulled my eyes toward the shadows at the end of the hall, where the nursery door stood slightly ajar. Something moved. Something small. My breath caught in my throat. The child, or the thing that pretended to be a child, was standing there, peeking around the corner with those bottomless black eyes. It didn't move, just watched, its head tilted to one side, waiting. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy candle holder, and threw it toward the hallway. It shattered against the wall, but the creature didn't even flinch. It just smiled, that grotesque, two-eyed grin, and took a slow, deliberate step forward. I backed away, my body trembling. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The creature's smile grew impossibly larger, stretching its pale skin until it seemed like it would tear. And then it whispered, "You brought me here." My stomach dropped. The words didn't make sense, nothing made sense, but a cold wave of realization began to settle in. The house, the crib. I had never questioned why the previous owners had left it behind, had I? Or why they'd moved out so suddenly. I hadn't even wanted to see the nursery, not until the strange occurrences started. The creature took another step forward, and this time I saw it. In its hand, it clutched something, a small, torn piece of cloth. It was the same fabric from the blanket in the crib. It was holding onto it like a lifeline, dragging it across the floor. And suddenly, memories started to surface, faint whispers of something I had forgotten. The stories the neighbors had told me about the previous owners. The tragic accident. I had brushed it off as a local legend, a cautionary tale to scare newcomers. But the longer I stared at the creature, the more the pieces started to fit together. This thing had been waiting, lurking in the shadows, ever since I moved in. The lullaby, the laughter, it wasn't random. It was summoning me. "Sarah, playtime is over," it whispered, its voice a hollow rasp, its black eyes burning with an unnatural hunger. It lunged forward, moving faster than I could react. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the edge of the couch, and I fell hard to the floor. The room spun, and before I could get up, the creature was on top of me, its cold, bony hands wrapping around my throat, squeezing. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was its grin, stretched wide, impossibly wide. And then, the lullaby stopped. I awoke to darkness. Cold, suffocating darkness. My body was sprawled on the floor, the weight of the creature no longer on me. For a moment, I lay there, disoriented, trying to recall what had happened. Slowly, the memories flooded back, the twisted child, its black eyes, the hands choking the breath from my lungs. I gasped, sitting upright, my hands instinctively reaching for my throat. It was sore, but I was alive. The silence was deafening. No lullaby. No whispers. Just the oppressive stillness of the house. I strained to listen, terrified that the creature might still be nearby, but all I could hear was my own shallow breathing. Had it left? I staggered to my feet, my body aching. My head throbbed, but I needed to know. I needed to make sure it was gone. I grabbed the closest candle from the table, its flame flickering weakly, casting trembling shadows across the room. The hallway stretched out in front of me, a yawning black void. I stepped forward, my legs shaky, every nerve in my body on high alert. The nursery door stood open. Slowly, I approached, dread curling in my stomach. The air grew colder with every step, that familiar, unnatural chill that had settled in the house since the lullaby first started. I gripped the candle tighter as I crossed the threshold. The crib was empty. The blankets were tossed aside, the doll gone. Relief washed over me. It was over. The creature had vanished. I took a step toward the crib, needing to see it empty with my own eyes. But as I leaned over, something caught my eye, a small, pale object, lying half-hidden beneath the crib. I knelt, my hands shaking as I pulled it out. It was the doll's head, cracked down the middle, with one glassy eye missing. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at it, a deep unease rising within me. I turned to leave, but then something else caught my attention. A low hum, barely audible, like a faint murmur drifting through the walls. The lullaby. It was starting again. No, this couldn't be happening. I backed away from the crib, my pulse quickening, the lullaby growing louder with each passing second. It seemed to seep from the very walls, wrapping itself around me. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut with a violent force, trapping me inside. I screamed, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The air in the room grew thick, almost suffocating, as the walls seemed to close in. My vision blurred as I spun around, desperate for a way out. And that's when I saw it, etched into the wooden floor beneath the crib. A name. Emily. I froze. The name echoed in my mind, dredging up pieces of a forgotten memory. Emily. The name of the child who had died in this house. The accident. The grief-stricken parents who had fled, leaving everything behind. Suddenly, the lullaby cut off, replaced by a soft, trembling voice. Sarah. It was different now, softer, more innocent, almost pleading. I turned, my eyes locking onto the crib. The shadows shifted, and there, standing in the center of the room, was a little girl. Her face pale, her eyes wide and hollow. She wasn't the twisted creature from before. This was something else. Something human. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered, her voice trembling with sadness. I just wanted someone to play with me. My breath hitched. This wasn't the thing that had attacked me. This was the ghost of a forgotten child. The child whose spirit had been trapped here for years, abandoned, left alone. The lullaby, the whispers, it was all her. A desperate cry for attention. Emily, I whispered, tears burning my eyes. The little girl blinked up at me, her black eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't know. The girl's form began to flicker, her body fading in and out of focus. She stepped toward the crib, her tiny hand reaching for the broken doll. I just wanted a friend, she murmured, her voice barely audible now, as if being carried away by the wind. I watched helplessly as she picked up the doll's head, clutching it to her chest. The air around her shimmered, and for the briefest moment, I saw the child she had once been, innocent, smiling, full of life. Then, in an instant, she was gone, leaving behind nothing but the broken doll and the lingering echoes of her lullaby. I stood there, trembling, the weight of her loneliness pressing down on me. The house fell silent once again, and I knew Emily was finally at rest. But as I reached for the door, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candle in my hand. The darkness enveloped me, and from deep within the house, I heard the lullaby start once more. This time, I wasn't alone. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.